I'm not going to talk about kind of big society in general. I do a lot about that. I think that you know, as one line about big society, it creates lots of opportunities which can be really, really beneficial to tackle inequality and some of the kind of challenges and social problems that we face within communities. But critically, those opportunities need to be accessed and taken advantage of in an equitable way. Otherwise, we risk exacerbating inequality. Or, Belinda has already said, I'm sure, you know, Anna will also kind of pick up that point. What I wanted to do, just to kind of give myself something different to think about and talk about, and obviously you, hopefully, to stimulate some different thinking, is to focus on community organisers as a particular, almost as a kind of probably the most tangible aspect of big society, alongside the Big Society Bank, as something which actually government is committing to doing, to making happen, specifically with money. We're going to do this. So, community organisers. Now, before the election, when the Conservatives first published their policy paper on big society, I read it because I'm paid to, and I saw references to Saul Alinsky and his model of community organising. Now, I don't know how many of you are kind of familiar with Saul Alinsky's work. For those who aren't, he's an American activist, come academic sociologist type, who worked with poor communities from 1930s during Depression all the way up to his death in the 1970s. And in 1971 he wrote a book called Rules for Radicals. Now, Rules for Radicals says in the preface, you know, it is a blueprint for those without power to take power from those who have it. So far, so good. You know, it's not about anything other than challenging the status quo, creating a kind of framework for you know, those who lack power, i.e., you know, marginalised groups, the people kind of we're concerned with when we talk about equality and social justice, taking power, challenging the vested interest and everything that's kind of the usual way of doing things, and having a piece of that for themselves. Now, Alinsky traditionally, although he was kind of politically or unaffiliated to a political party, though he'd be hard pressed to choose a party in the States, I guess. But it's traditionally been kind of associated with centre-left and sort of social justice, social democratic ways of working, not something you would expect necessarily to see in the Conservative Party manifesto or policy document prior to the manifesto. So there I was thinking, well, why is it in there? Why have David Cameron's Conservatives mentioned Alinsky? And my first thought was, well, Barack Obama, he was a community organiser. He's just been elected on a popular wave of kind of change. That's got to be it. They just want to sprinkle some Obama magic dust. And actually, probably there's an element of truth in that, I still think. You know, but since the election, and bear in mind, you know, David Cameron has persistently kind of talked about the big society when he was lampooned, this neighbourhood army of community organisers. You know, got some real flack in the election campaign, and yet he's consistently kind of talked about it, and his ministers, Nick Hurd, you know, consistently kind of taken forward. In fact, now not just Alinsky, but Paulo Freire as well cited as a community organiser. And again, there are strong models in the UK of both Freire's approach, the pedagogy of the oppressed, and Alinsky in the UK. So why are they doing this? And then this is my hypothesis, and you can take it or leave it. Basically, in '97, when the Labour government came to power, they had a fairly ambitious programme to tackle inequality. The Neighbourhood Renewal Strategy in 1999 and the Social Exclusion Unit and the Task Force and all these sort of plethora of reports that came out talked about narrowing the gap between the most marginalised, most deprived communities and households and areas and the rest. That was ambitious stuff. Now they got bored with it and jettisoned it to the latter part of their third term, or even before that. But you know, at the outset they had some very ambitious plans, and yet they were thwarted. They were thwarted by vested interest in Whitehall, by vested interest in the voluntary and community sector, by vested interest in local government, by vested interest in the private sector. in all these areas, there were people who were very, very happy and had a huge amount to gain from things staying the way they were. The status quo does not budge without a fight. So having learnt from the experience of the Labour government and seen how their ambition was thwarted, the Tories have, I believe, tried to come up with a way to create disruption. And the community organiser is their model for disruption. Because Alinsky's model is about challenging those who have power. It is about challenge and a very adversarial approach to power. It is, I mean, we must welcome, from an equalities and social justice perspective, an analysis and an approach which starts with an understanding of the inequality of power, because ultimately many other forms of inequality stem from a lack of power, and therefore economic equality or economic inequality is reinforced by the very powerful banks doing deals with the government behind closed doors. The headline says £1 billion going to the big society bank, and what it doesn't tell you is what they've given up without us knowing. This is the government committed to transparency and open government, but never mind. So, you know, vested interest protects and perpetuates power, perpetuates other forms of inequality. So a starting point for any approach to address inequality that puts power at the start is good in my book. So they're saying, okay, well, we'll put in these disruptors, they will shake things up, they will challenge power, and in principle, I've got no problem signing up to that. I think actually it's a very sensible strategy if your primary objective is to bring about radical transformative change. However, the risk, I think, is that, you know, you create conflict, you create chaos, and ultimately, if it goes well, you create positive change and a new paradigm, and things emerge out of the chaos that are better, and that enable people who lack power to have power and enable people to take advantage of new opportunities. The risk is that in some areas, the conflict continues, the chaos reigns, and they don't move from that stage. And in the back of my mind, that just kind of invokes memories of growing up under Margaret Thatcher, who was ultimately prepared to write off whole communities in kind of just, you know, dismantling the sort of the industrial heartlands of the North in the UK economy and in the drive to kind of modernise the British economy. So the risk for a kind of an equalities perspective is how do we best ensure that A, community organisers are advocates for the poor and not you know, the kind of the advocates for vested interest in the status quo. And I don't have any confidence in the commissioning process that government employs to identify a process that will work. You know, and secondly, how do we ensure, and indeed how do we support, areas that descend into chaos and don't move to this new paradigm of the big society? How do we make sure that they are able and equipped to move from chaos? Otherwise, we will find, as with the whole big society programme, inequality exacerbated greatly going forward.